All right. Well, let's go to our last one, which is Morocco. Morocco is going to bring cryptocurrency regulation soon, which I guess doesn't really tell us a whole lot other than the fact that they're going to do something. But what I thought was interesting about this is that Morocco in 2017 banned Bitcoin and cryptocurrency transactions. So you weren't allowed to buy Bitcoin, to transact in it. And because we've seen in other places when ban or limit Bitcoin, it doesn't tend to do a whole lot. It seems like there's been enough interest from within Morocco for people to be able to use these types of technologies that now the government is saying, all right, well, rather than try to ban something that we know we can't ban, we're going to regulate it in a way that allows us to feel comfortable letting our citizens use it, which, regard I don't want to get into a discussion about the whether that's a good or bad thing for governments to regulate it.
Hmm.
I'd rather talk about that when we have some real regulation to discuss, because this is just something that might happen. But again, I've talked about this, and I don't know if you agree, but my view on this is that ideally there's no regulation. It's a free market, right? But the real world answer is that if we want Bitcoin to work within the existing system to the point where it can then grow within the existing system, you have to let governments have their say. Now, does that mean I'm okay with the government coming in and banning it? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you have reasonable oversight in a way that actually, you know, helps the adoption, then I'm in favor of that. And so I think from that
Hmm.
standpoint, this is Morocco to me saying, well, 5 years ago we tried to ban it, that didn't work. Too many of our people want it, so we're going to come up with a framework that we're okay with, that we think will protect our citizens, and go from there. And so to me, that's a positive move.
Hmm. And I read that I believe less than 2.5% of their citizens use it. So it's not like what we talked about earlier with 40% of millennials in the US. I mean, it's a really pretty small part of their population is using it. And to go from banning it and having any transaction be illegal 5 years ago to coming up with regulation for it. We've seen this in other places before. If this is not a new story, this is just Morocco's version of this story.
Right.
And that also ties back into the discussion we were having earlier, which is like one of the things that makes Bitcoin so unique is that it doesn't have a CEO, it doesn't have any employees, it doesn't have anyone whose arm you can twist. And every 10 minutes, it puts down a new block. You just can't stop this thing. And governments worldwide tend to be not the best at solving any problems, right? They're not great. They are not great at finding solutions. They're good at making problems worse. Most of the time, they'll make problems worse. But also governments are run by regular people. In democracies, these are people who get elected. Their skill set is to be charismatic and to be able to get you to vote for them, but it doesn't mean they've got a good understanding of economics or or a lot of other things, which is why you get these crazy laws, is because you're asking people who know almost nothing about something to create the rules for something. But here's the problem. You're dealing with pretty regular people, even if you're dealing with very smart, some very smart people. But what's the game plan for dealing with something that we've never had on the planet before that you can't control?
Right.
Like you can't send in a hit
Yep.
squad to to capture their chief developer or
Yeah,
whoever
you
runs
can't
their
raid the
network, right?
headquarters.
Can't raid headquarters. There's a better way of putting it. You can't do anything like that. Can't put someone in a room and say, that's a beautiful family you have there. It should be a shame if something were to happen to them. And when you can't do that and you can't shut it off, then you have to find a way to coexist. And that's what we've seen in India. We've seen it in Morocco. I know their account. Well, we saw in China, they banned mining. And then all of a sudden, 2 months later, 20% of the hash rates in China. So, these countries really can't stop it. And as time goes on, I really believe that as we see this incremental adoption, even a country like the Central African Republic, which I believe is like they go live in July,
Hmm.
it's all these other outlets to do it. And there's also significant benefit for other countries that, there are a lot of countries in the world that use dollars that don't necessarily want to be using dollars. So
Right.
as the stuff goes on, we're going to see this story play out, just like we see the luxury brands adopting BitPay and adopting other cryptocurrencies and the ability to pay with Bitcoin. We're going to see the same story, I think, in more and more countries. And I do think it's important to watch the countries where it's happening and to pay very close attention to these stories. I think they're extremely significant, even if it doesn't move the price, at least for the short term.
Sure. No, I agree. And, again, with Morocco, you're talking about less than 1 million people that are currently using it. But, a lot of that number might be limited by the fact that there's, the government's banned it in the past, and maybe that will lead to more adoption as those regulations change. We'll see.
So what's the population of Morocco?
It's about 40 million, a little less.
Okay. Right. So still 1 million people. It's a lot of people. That's still a pretty large aggregate number. It's not
Sure.
insignificant in that country. I mean, it might be,
I mean, they're not an insignificant country. I mean, it's not like, I'll put it to you this way. If the announcement a couple months ago had been Morocco accepting Bitcoin as legal tender versus the Central African Republic, it would have been, I think, a lot more bigger news.
some of the biggest news ever in the history of Bitcoin, in my opinion.
Right.
If
Right.
Morocco had adopted as legal tender. And we will see that. I really do believe we will see some countries doing this. I think that there's so much turmoil and chaos in the financial markets right now. We haven't seen the shakeout yet. We don't even know how this is going to play out. To be honest, some of it's above my head. Even though I spent a lot of time studying it, some of it is just all the world economies are tied together. And there's some really weird stuff going on in Japan right now. There's weird stuff going on with the US bond market. There's a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
unusual things going on. And what the landscape looks like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, but it's certainly going to look a lot different than it does today.